The first thing I noticed about Dante Salvatore was not his face. It was the ring. Cool metal slid against the inside of my wrist, hard enough to stop my pulse for a second, and then his hand closed around me like a verdict. Not rough. Rough would have been easier. Rough I could have hated. This was controlled, precise. The sort of touch that assumed the world would move if he wanted it to. "Dance with me," he said, his mouth close to my ear, his voice low enough that only I heard the last part. "Or die." For one stupid suspended second, I thought he meant him. My tray shook. Champagne flutes chimed against each other in a thin, terrified song. The ballroom of Hotel Salvatore glowed gold and cream around us, crystal chandeliers, white roses, politicians smiling with their teeth but not their eyes, wives glittering like expensive lies. Somewhere to my left, a violin section played something soft and rich and old-world beautiful. Somewhere to my right, one of the bartenders dropped a spoon. I looked up. He was taller than I expected. Dark hair, black tuxedo, white shirt, black tie. His face was the kind men spend whole lives trying not to make angry. Not handsome in a harmless way, handsome in the way storms were beautiful from inside houses built by someone else. "I'm just the help," I whispered. His gaze cut over my shoulder, not to me. "Past me." "Exactly," he said. "So be forgettable. Move." He took the tray from my hand without looking at it and passed it to a man who appeared from nowhere in a better suit and a worse expression. Then Dante Salvatore put one hand at my back, caught my wrist again with the other, and turned me straight into the center of the floor. The room opened for him. That was what frightened me most. Not the men I had heard about in kitchens and hallways, not the rumors about bodies in rivers, or judges with new houses. It was the silence. The way Italian murmurs died mid-syllable, the way armed men in tuxedos shifted half an inch, enough to change the geometry of the room. The orchestra never stopped. "Smile," he said. I did not. His fingers flexed once at my spine. Adriana Bellini, 24. 2 years at the hotel. Night classes at St. Aurelia Culinary. Mother in assisted care. No priors. No boyfriend worth mentioning. If you faint, I'll be annoyed. I stared at him. You had me investigated. He moved me through the first turn of the waltz as if I had agreed to this, as if we were two people at a gala and not a waitress and the man whose name made dishwashers cross themselves. "I investigate everyone in my house. This isn't your house." One eyebrow lifted. "Right, fine." It was his house. His hand at my back never slipped lower. His grip on my wrist loosened just enough for me to follow without stumbling. I was breathing too fast. I knew that because my ribs hurt. I knew 5 other things too. The man in the navy tie near the east pillar was sweating through his collar. The woman in green at table 12 had stopped pretending not to stare. Dante's cuff was wet. Someone had opened the terrace doors. And there, in the mirrored panel beyond his shoulder, red, a pinprick, brief, then gone. My steps failed. His hand tightened. "Keep moving." "Theirs, I know." The word went through me like ice water. A sniper. The realization made my knees weak. Not a metaphor. Not a story whispered over cut limes in the service kitchen. A real rifle somewhere beyond the glass. A real scope. A real line already drawn to flesh. Mine? His? I didn't know. Maybe both. The waltz turned again. I should have started crying, begging, asking him why me, why this, why tonight. Instead, because shock made me stupid and my eyes had fixed on the wrong detail, I looked down at his left hand. His cufflink had torn loose. Blood darkened the edge of his white sleeve. "You're bleeding," I whispered. Nothing changed in his face, but something in his body did. A stillness inside the motion, as if I had touched a locked door without meaning to. "Ballerina," he said, cold and quiet. "If you want to live, do not distract me." I didn't even know what he meant by the name. I had never danced in my life outside childhood weddings, and that 1 year of middle school lessons my mother swore would help posture. But I understood the warning. I lasted 3 more turns. Then, instinct beat fear. A folded linen napkin sat on a passing tray by the dance floor's edge. I let go of every lesson I had ever learned about not touching powerful men and snatched it blind. He caught my wrist again, harder this time, maybe thinking I was about to run. "Hold still," I whispered. He actually looked at me then. Not over me. Not through me. Not through me. At me. My shaking fingers pressed the napkin over the blood at his cuff. His jaw changed. It was small. Ridiculously small. A waitress with trembling hands putting pressure on a wound any sane woman would have pretended not to see. But I felt the moment land between us, heavy and strange. No one else could have noticed. The room was too busy pretending nothing was happening. His men were adjusting positions with invisible efficiency. Guests were being steered away from the terrace in a pattern so elegant it almost looked like courtesy. Somewhere behind us, glass broke. The orchestra played louder. "You should duck on the next turn," I said, because I was apparently insane. A muscle jumped in his cheek. Then the music swelled. He moved. Fast. His arm locked around my waist and he turned a sharply left just as the chandelier above table 8 exploded into rain. People screamed, not all at once. First one woman, then 3 men. Then the whole room tore open. Dante pushed me down behind a fallen banquet table with his body over mine. Silverware skidded. Someone fired twice. Someone else answered from much closer. I put my hands over my head and felt the heavy fall of his chest above my back, shielding me from shards of crystal and the hysterical stampede of expensive shoes. "Do not move," he said into my hair. I didn't. Seconds or hours later, the shooting stopped. When he stood, the world had changed. Men in tuxedos had guns in their hands now. White tablecloths were stained. The violinists were gone. Smoke curled near the terrace doors. A body in navy lay twisted beside the pillar where I had seen the red reflection. The sniper hadn't been aiming at me. He had been aiming at Dante. I pushed myself up on shaking arms. "You used me as cover." He looked down at me. "No," he said. "I moved you before they fired." That should have comforted me. It did not. He offered me his hand. The cuff was still wrapped in my napkin. I stared at it. "Adriana," he said, voice flat enough to make refusal feel childish. "Up." I took his hand because the floor was slick and because I was afraid if I didn't, one of his men would simply lift me. The man with the worse expression from before appeared at Dante's shoulder. He was broad, scarred, and had the patient look of someone accustomed to cleaning up after violence. "Perimeters sealed," he said. "We found one shooter dead. No second visual." "Search the kitchens," Dante said. My head snapped up. "Why the kitchens?" "Because," he said, still looking at the room, "not me. That's where someone left the service map with my route marked in red." My stomach dropped. I had seen that map, folded under a tray cloth beside the dessert station. I had thought it was some manager's seating diagram and shoved it into my apron pocket without reading it because the mousse was falling and table 9 wanted espresso. My hand flew to my apron. Empty. Dante watched the realization hit me. There was blood on his sleeve, dust in his hair, glass in the hem of my skirt. Around us, his empire rearranged itself in silence. "Come with me," he said. "I didn't do anything. I know." "Then let me go home." He held my gaze for one endless second. No, I should have argued. I should have screamed, run, demanded a lawyer, a priest, an ambulance, the manager, anyone normal. Instead, because his ring brushed my wrist again, and because somewhere under the smoke I could still smell starch and spilled champagne and the iron edge of his blood, I followed him through the side door the staff used. The kitchen lights were too bright. My shoes crunched on sugar glass from the toppled dessert display. Somebody was crying near the walk-in freezer. Dante did not slow. Behind me, the ballroom doors swung shut. So did everything else. I woke in silk sheets that were not mine and sat up so fast the room tipped. For a second, I thought I had dreamed the whole thing. The gunfire. The shattered chandelier, the hand at my back, the command in my ear. Then I saw the door. Heavy walnut. brass handle, lock on the outside. My throat tightened. The suite was the size of my entire apartment, maybe larger. Pale walls, black marble bathroom, tall windows overlooking the river, a vase of white lilies on a table near the fireplace, their scent too sweet, almost rotten at the edges. Someone had placed folded clothes on a chair beside the bed, cream sweater, dark skirt, stockings, soft slippers. Not my uniform. Not my life. A tray waited under a silver dome. Of course it did. I got out of bed, crossed the rug on bare feet, and lifted the lid because panic did not cancel hunger. Eggs. Toast. Fruit. Espresso. A tiny glass jar of apricot jam, on a second plate, one perfect sfogliatella, layered and golden, still warm. I stared at it. That was either generosity or strategy. I was reaching for the coffee when the door opened, and a man walked in backward, arguing over his shoulder. "I'm telling you, Maria, if there is visible salt on the eggs, I will simply lie down in the hallway and let nature take me." A woman's voice floated in from the corridor. "You say that every morning, and yet unfortunately you continue living." He turned, saw me standing there, and stopped dead. He was maybe 30, maybe younger. With dark curls, he had obviously given up trying to control in a suit that fit too well for a man carrying a breakfast tray like he had been born to domestic tragedy. His eyes flicked to my face, then to the untouched food, then to the locked windows, and something like pity passed quickly through his expression before humor covered it. "Ah," he said, "the prisoner is awake. I'm not a prisoner." He glanced at the door. "No? Wonderful. Then I've been carrying breakfast to a highly stressed houseguest and can return to making better choices with my life." She shut the door with his foot and set down a second pot of coffee I hadn't noticed in his other hand. "I'm Gio," he said, "driver, fixer, bearer of impossible burdens, victim of Maria Costa's ongoing butter-based assassination attempts. If she asks, you enjoyed the eggs. I don't know who Maria is. Our cook. My destroyer. A woman who interprets medical restrictions as personal criticism." He touched his chest. "My cardiologist says I have to avoid sodium." Maria heard that and began seasoning from spite. Despite everything, a laugh pushed at my throat. It came out wrong. Thin. Frayed. Gio's expression gentled. "Eat," he said. "It's harder to argue on an empty stomach, and you will absolutely be arguing today. Is he keeping me here?" He made a face that said many things, and none of them were safe to trust. The boss is being careful. With me? With everyone? That wasn't an answer. He noticed the sfogliatella still untouched and brightened. "Ah, there it is. Maria said if you don't eat that pastry, she'll blame me. And if she blames me, I'll spend the rest of the week drinking broth that tastes like regret. Is everything in this place a threat?" "In fairness," Gio said, "only half of them are culinary. I sat at the table because my legs were weak and because whatever happened next, I wanted caffeine first." He poured coffee without asking how I took it, then noticed the way I watched the door. "He won't hurt you," he said. "It came too quickly, too practiced." My fingers tightened on the cup. People keep saying things like that around dangerous men, as if it means something. Gio considered me over the rim of his own espresso. "That's fair." He was still there when Dante came in 10 minutes later. No one announced him. No knock. The room just changed. Gio stood automatically. I hated that I noticed it, the way even funny men straightened when power entered. Dante wore a black suit again. No tie this time, his shirt open at the throat. Fresh bandage at his wrist. No visible exhaustion, though he should have had some. Men like him always looked as if sleep obeyed them too. His gaze landed on the untouched pastry first, then on me. "Leave us," he said. Gio set his cup down with theatrical sorrow. "If she throws the coffee pot at you, I want the record to show I supported her privately." Dante looked at him. Gio sighed. "See? This is why I need butter, for morale." He slipped out, shutting the door softly behind him. I stood because sitting made me feel cornered. I want to go home. Dante walked to the window, glanced once at the river, then turned. "No, that's simple. that calm. Anger came easier than fear for a second, and I grabbed it. You can't keep me in a locked room because someone shot at you. I can keep you alive because someone shot at me from inside my hotel. I didn't help them. I know. Then why am I here? He crossed the room in 4 silent steps. I did not move back, mostly because pride was a terrible survival instinct. Because you handled a marked service map before the attempt, he said. Because whoever planted it may believe you saw more than you understood. Because last night, instead of screaming or bargaining, you put pressure on a wound and told me to hold still. Heat crawled up my throat. That doesn't explain anything. It explains enough. For you. His eyes held mine. Yes. I hated how much that answer shook me. There was no persuasion in him. No softening. He wasn't trying to make this feel reasonable. Maybe that was worse. A liar at least left room for insult. Dante just told the truth in a shape I couldn't fight. I have a mother, I said. She'll worry. She's been informed you're safe. My heart knocked once, hard. By who? By the care facility administrator. Through a number that cannot be traced here. It should have relieved me. Instead it made me cold. You looked through my life. I told you that last night. My job, you no longer work nights. My classes will continue. I blinked. What? He seemed almost impatient that I had not reached the part he considered obvious. You will finish culinary school. I stared at him. Are you bribing me? No. Then what are you doing? His gaze dropped, just briefly, to the coffee cup in my hand, maybe because it was trembling. Removing variables. That should not have sounded intimate. It did. I set the cup down before I dropped it. You don't get to reorganize my life because a man with a rifle missed. He took another step closer. I caught the smell of him then, Cedar. Clean starch, something colder underneath, like night air on stone. My body noticed before my mind wanted it to. I do, he said, because if he hadn't missed, you would have died in the stampede. I can decide what risks I take. No, he said quietly. Not this one. The room went very still. I looked at the bandage on his wrist because it was easier than looking at his face. My napkin was gone, replaced by professional dressing and neat tape, but I remembered the heat of his skin under the linen. I remembered the way he had looked at me after. That name, I said. Ballerina. His head tilted slightly. I'm not one. I know. Then stop calling me that. He watched me for a second too long. When you're no longer moving like you're trying not to be seen, I'll consider it. I should have come back with something sharp, something worthy. Instead, I said the first true thing. You make that difficult. Something almost happened to his mouth. Not a smile. Something rarer. A knock sounded once. The door opened an inch, and Gio leaned in. Maria wants to know if the prisoner enjoyed the pastry, because apparently my survival depends on your answer. For the first time since last night, Dante looked annoyed in a nearly human way. Gio, what? It's a hostile workplace. I swallowed because if I didn't speak now, I might never laugh again. The pastry was good. Gio pressed a hand to his heart. A miracle. I live another day. He vanished again. Dante's gaze had gone back to me. Whatever softness that interruption might have created disappeared. The door remains locked, he said. You may ask for anything reasonable. Books, clothes, your school materials. If you need to speak to your mother, it will be arranged. And if I try to leave, he answered without raising his voice, you won't. That was the worst part about him. I believed him. By the 3rd day, I knew the sound of the penthouse corridors. Soft shoes on runner carpets. The distant hum of elevators that only reached the private floors. Men's voices lowered when they passed my door. The heavy, expensive silence of wealth that had nothing warm in it. By the 4th day, I stopped trying the handle every hour. By the 5th, I was taken downstairs. Not free, not trusted, just relocated, Lucia Ferraro met me outside the suite with a measuring tape around her neck and a pistol under her coat, which felt like a fair summary of Dante's world. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, beautiful in the exhausted way of women who had earned every line in their faces. Her gray dress was immaculate. Her mouth was not. "If he sends you to dinner in one of my gowns and you slouch in it, I'll know," she said by way of introduction. I blinked. "I'm sorry? Good. Manners survive. That helps." She marched me to an elevator, pushed the button with one red-painted nail, and looked me over as if I were a hymnline she had not yet decided to save. "You don't belong here," she said. "I'm aware. That wasn't comfort." "I know." That seemed to satisfy her. "Good. Comfort gets women killed." The elevator opened to the private kitchens, not the hotel kitchens I knew with steam and shouted orders and managers pretending not to see theft. These were quieter, brighter, more exacting. Copper pans hung in rows, stone counters reflected the overhead lights. The air smelled of espresso, yeast, orange peel, and money. Maria Costa ruled the center island like a benevolent tyrant in an apron. Short, compact, silver hair pinned up, she took one look at me and shoved a bowl into my hands. "Whisk," she said. "Hello to you too. If you overwhip, I'll know you're nervous. If you underwhip, I'll know you're careless. Let's find out which insult you are." I started whisking. Lucia leaned on a counter, arms crossed. "This is not charity," she told me. "If you stay near the house, you work near the house. I'm being put to work in captivity?" Maria snorted. "Child, in this family, that is mercy." She moved around me with brisk efficiency, checking pastry shells, cursing softly in Italian, threatening a young prep cook with spiritual consequences if he burned the pine nuts. It should have felt surreal. Instead, it felt almost like relief. Stainless steel. Flour. Ratios. Heat. Things that made sense. "You're at St. Aurelia," Maria said without looking up. "Professor Bianchi says you plate like you're apologizing." I stopped whisking. "You know Professor Bianchi? He owes me money." "Of course he did. Keep going," she said. "You want to be good. Stop asking permission with your hands." That landed harder than I liked. So I whisked harder. By noon, I had filled cannoli, piped diplomat cream, torched meringue, and forgotten for whole stretches at a time that armed men stood outside every door. My body settled into work the way it always did. Measure. Fold. Taste. Adjust. Maria watched everything and pretended not to be impressed until I corrected the lemon zest in her ricotta filling by a whisper. Her eyebrow rose. "Again," she said, pushing another bowl at me. I tasted, frowned, and added a pinch of salt. From the doorway, a slow voice said, "If Gio hears that, he'll ask whether murder by pastry counts as natural causes." I looked up. Matteo Rinaldi stood with one shoulder against the frame, suit jacket open over a shoulder holster, a scar dragging pale along his jaw. He was the man from the ballroom cleanup, the one who had said the perimeter was sealed. His face was severe. His eyes were not. Maria waved a spoon at him. "Tell your doctor he's a coward." "My doctor is his doctor," Matteo said. "That explains the hysteria." He looked at me then, not like Dante did, not as if I were a problem in motion, more like he was deciding where I fit on a map. "Bellini," he said. "Rinaldi," I answered, because if everyone here was going to know my entire file, I could at least act like I had one too. Something like approval flickered. "The boss wants you upstairs at 7, he said. "Family dinner." My hand slipped. Cream hit the counter. "Absolutely not," I said. Mattea's expression barely changed. "That wasn't a request." Maria clicked her tongue. Then he should have sent a request if he wanted her not to look sick. Lucia, who had apparently appeared again by magic, spoke without lifting her gaze from the gown she was pinning on a mannequin. "He wants to see who watches her." A chill moved down my back. Why? Because someone will. No one said the rest out loud. And when they did, Dante would learn something. I spent the next hour making dessert because not making dessert would have required screaming. Maria had me build individual tarts with bitter chocolate crust, blood orange curd, and a thin glass shell of caramel over the top. Beautiful. Fragile. Hard until touched wrong. What do you call it? Maria asked. I looked at the rose cooling on the rack. Fall from grace. She gave me a sharp look. Melodramatic. Accurate. From the doorway, Matteo said, I liked it better when desserts were just desserts. Maria pointed a spoon at him. That is because God denied you imagination. At 6:30, Lucia marched me upstairs and put me in dark green silk that made me look older and softer and less like myself. She pinned my hair back, then paused behind me in the mirror. Listen carefully, she said. At dinner, speak when spoken to. If Carlo Abate smiles too much, leave. If Vittorio Marchetti asks about your family, lie. If Dante says run, don't ask why. I turned in the chair. Who is Vittorio Marchetti? Her mouth thinned. A man old enough to know better and rich enough not to care. That was not comforting. Dinner was held in a private dining room on the 42nd floor, all candlelight and dark wood and windows looking down on the city like judgment. Men in suits sat around the table with the easy stillness of people accustomed to giving orders that ended in graves. Carlo Abate, silver-haired and elegant, rose to pull out my chair with grandfatherly warmth that made my skin go cold, though I couldn't have said why. At the head of the table sat Dante. He looked at me once, noted the dress, the pinned hair, the fact that I had come. Then he glanced at the place set near his right hand. Mine. The meal unfolded in low voices and controlled civility. I answered direct questions and ignored the rest. Vittorio Marchetti arrived late, smiling like the sort of man who kissed babies with one hand and signed executions with the other. He was older than Dante by decades, handsome in a worn patrician way, with eyes too alive to trust. So this, he said, settling into his chair, is the ballerina. My spine went cold. Dante set down his wine glass very carefully. She has a name. Vittoria's gaze slid to me. Of course she does. The first course came and went. The second. Men discussed shipping routes, aldermen, a priest in Cicero who had become inconvenient. I kept my hands folded in my lap and tried not to look frightened. Then dessert was served. My dessert. Vittorio took one bite of the tart and smiled. Excellent. Dante did not touch his. I knew why before anyone else did. The smell reached me a second later faint, almost elegant under the orange and caramel. Bitter almond. Poison. My head snapped up. Don't. The room stopped. Every eye turned. I was already moving, grabbing Dante's plate before I could think better of it. The fork clattered. Chocolate streaked the linen. Matteo had his gun out before the plate hit the floor. Dante looked from the ruined tart to me. How do you know? He asked. My breath came fast. Apricot kernel oil and cyanide derivatives smell similar when heated wrong. Only a little. I swallowed. It's bitter almond. Vittorio had not moved. Neither had Carlo. Around the table, armed men were suddenly no longer pretending they were decorative. Dante rose. Slowly. Clear the room, he said. No one argued. As chairs scraped back and men obeyed, I looked at the poisoned dessert on the carpet and understood two things at once. Someone inside Dante Salvatore's house had tried to kill him, and I had just saved his life in front of everyone who wanted him dead. When I looked up, he was already looking at me, not like a waitress, like a fuse. After the poisoned tart, nobody pretended I was temporary. That was the worst gift Dante Salvatore ever gave me. For 2 days, the penthouse became a sealed lung-breathing danger in and out. Men came and went at all hours. Matteo doubled security. Carlo Abate smiled more, which made Lucia visibly reach for cigarettes she was trying not to smoke. Vittorio sent flowers so extravagant Maria called them funeral arrangements with delusions. And me, I got moved from the locked suite to a room down the hall from Dante's. Not because I had earned trust, because I had become useful. I should have hated that cleanly. Instead, I hated the part of myself that slept better knowing his door was near. The rain started after midnight on Thursday, hard enough to turn the windows black with it. I woke from a dream I couldn't fully remember, except for smoke and little girl laughter and the smell of burnt sugar. My chest hurt. The room was too warm. I put on slippers and followed the sound of the storm out to the terrace because fear always made me need air. The private terrace ran along the side of the penthouse, roofed in glass and open at the edges where the rain blew in. Planters lined the wall. A wrought iron table sat abandoned near the far end. Beyond it, the city shimmered wet and distant. Dante stood in the rain without an umbrella. Of course he did. His shirt was white. That was the first ridiculous thing I noticed. White, sleeves rolled, rain soaking it through and turning the fabric almost translucent over the hard lines of his shoulders. His jacket hung over the back of a chair. He had one hand braced on the stone balustrade and the other at his side, fingers curled, head lowered as if the weather had insulted him personally. I should have gone back inside. Instead, I took 2 more steps. The terrace light caught the side of his face, the sharp line of his jaw, the dark, wet fall of his hair. And then he shifted and I saw it, a long, pale scar cutting from just under his collarbone down toward his ribs, old and ugly and wrong against the elegance of the rest of him. He heard me then. His head turned. His expression did not. You should be asleep. You should probably not be standing in a thunderstorm if people keep trying to shoot you. He looked back out over the city, noted. I should have left it there. But the dream still clung to me, and there was something about his stillness that felt less like calm and more like effort. What happened? I asked before I could stop myself. His gaze dropped once to the scar visible through his shirt, then returned to the skyline. Rain. That's not what I meant. No. Silence stretched between us, punctuated only by the drum of water on stone and glass. I wrapped my arms around myself and wished I had put on more than a thin robe. Without looking at me, Dante picked up his jacket and held it out. I stared. I'm not taking your coat. Ballerina. It came colder than warmth, a command with my new name inside it. I took the coat. It was heavy and warm from where it had rested near him, lined in silk, smelling faintly of cedar and clean dark wool. When I slipped it over my shoulders, it fell almost to my calves. You're shaking, he said. I'm cold. That wasn't a question. I hated how much he noticed. People usually shake after attempted murders. He looked at me then properly, as if measuring damage. You were not the target. No, I said softly. I was just close enough to learn what your life feels like. Something moved in his face. Gone too quickly to name. Lightning flashed somewhere over the river. For a second, the terrace went white. Dante's hand tightened on the stone rail. It was tiny, that motion, but I remembered Lucia's warning and the dream of smoke and sugar and a child's laugh I had never actually heard. I remembered the scar, the white shirt plastered to it. You hate storms, I said, his jaw set. I understood then that I had stepped into something private and dangerous, not because he would hurt me for it, but because he almost never let himself be seen inside it. They brought the fire back, he said finally, so low I almost missed it. The words sat between us, not an explanation, barely a sentence, but enough. I turned toward him fully. Rain blew onto the hem of my robe. I'm sorry. He gave a short, humorless breath. Don't be. For what happened. You don't know what happened. No. I swallowed, but I know what grief sounds like when someone is trying not to say its name. That made him look at me. For one charged second, the storm receded. The city. The war. The whole ugly machinery of his world. Everything narrowed to the space between my mouth and his silence. Then the terrace door banged open. Gio stepped out under an enormous black umbrella, saw us, and stopped so abruptly the umbrella flipped inside out. Well, he said to the heavens, wrestling with it, if this is a romantic scene, I'd like to formally object on the grounds that I have high blood pressure and inadequate outerwear. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The sound burst out of me, wrong and sudden and bright in the rain. Dante looked at me as if the laugh had surprised him more than gunfire ever could. Gio finally righted the umbrella and marched toward us with the solemn dignity of a man losing an argument with weather. Maria sent me, he announced. Apparently, if I allow either of you to drown or catch pneumonia, she'll feed my body to the pigeons. She hates pigeons? I asked. I do, Gio said darkly. Winged rats with opinions. That earned another laugh from me, smaller this time. Real. Gio pointed at Dante. And you, stop standing in the rain like a tragic statue. We paid for excellent roofing. Go inside, Gio. See? No appreciation. I save lives. I get barked at. Maria was right. I should have married a dentist. Gio shoved the umbrella handle into Dante's hand, turned to me, and lowered his voice conspiratorially. If he starts monologuing at the skyline, just nod. It usually passes. Then he vanished inside before Dante could stop him. The umbrella stood between us, ridiculous and black, and suddenly intimate. I looked up at Dante. He was close now, closer than he had been since the ballroom when proximity had meant survival. Not this other thing I refused to name. His hand shifted on the handle. The signet ring flashed, dark silver in the terrace light. My breath stalled. He saw it. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his free hand and brushed a raindrop from my temple. His knuckles barely touched skin. Just enough. The first real touch. Not the grip on my wrist. Not the hand at my back. Not the efficient catches and redirects of a man moving me through danger. This, my eyes lifted to his. He looked at my mouth once. Just once. Everything in me went painfully still. Then he dropped his hand. Go back to bed, Adriana. I hated how disappointed I was. Why? I asked. Because if I said stay, I would hear how stupid it sounded. Because, he said, voice rougher now, I am trying to do one decent thing at a time. He turned away before I could answer. When I went back inside, his jacket still around my shoulders and the rain still loud against the glass, I finally understood the shape of the danger. It wasn't only the men trying to kill him. It was the fact that part of me had already started wanting the things he refused to take. The secret about my father came out because men with guns tore my apartment apart before breakfast. Not metaphorically, not elegantly. They splintered the cheap front door, dumped drawers onto the floor, ripped open couch cushions, and cracked the frame of the one photograph I still kept face down in the hall closet. My parents on a summer street 20 years ago, my mother laughing, my father holding a pastry box tied with red string. I wasn't there when it happened. Dante had sent Matteo and 2 cars to take me to St. Aurelia for my midterm practical, because he had decided that if I insisted on finishing culinary school, I would do it trailed by enough armed men to invade a small country. I spent the whole ride furious on principle and trying not to notice that fury felt safer than fear. Then we reached my building and Matteo's phone rang. He answered, listened once, and his face changed. Stay in the car, he said. I knew before he finished the sentence that I wouldn't. By the time I got upstairs past the protests, my apartment looked like grief had searched it with both hands. Flour from a torn bag drifted across the kitchen floor like pale dust. The drawers of my mother's old dresser hung open and broken. The small ceramic saint from my windowsill lay in pieces under the radiator. My cookbook shelf had been cleared entirely. Not stolen. Examined. I stood in the doorway and forgot how to breathe. Matteo touched my elbow once. Bellini. I pulled away. Not from him. From the fact that if he steadied me, I might collapse. They hadn't taken much. Jewelry I didn't own. Cash I barely had. The television still sat where it always had. Whoever came here wanted paper. Notes. Hidden things. Something small enough to tuck. Important enough to destroy a home over. And then I saw the one thing they had missed. My father's old recipe ledger had fallen behind the radiator when the shelf came down. I went to it so fast. Matteo cursed. Don't touch anything. Too late. My hands were already in the dust, dragging out the black leather book with its cracked spine and flower on the cover. It had belonged to my father when he still believed talent could lift a man farther than fear. After he died, my mother packed away almost everything of his, but I kept this one because the pages smelled faintly of vanilla and tobacco, and because his handwriting slanted left when he was tired. Matteo went still. "Call the boss." I opened the ledger. Most of it was recipes, custards, sponge ratios, syrup infusions, notes and margins, but tucked near the center was a set of pages I had never noticed because they were written in shorthand, a private notation my father used when testing batches at work. Numbers beside ingredients, letters inside quantities, tiny circles around shipment dates, a code. I looked up slowly. I know what they wanted. Dante arrived in 11 minutes. I know because I counted. Counting gave my hands something to do while strangers swept my apartment for prints. And Matteo stood by the broken window like a guard dog who had learned patience instead of softness. When Dante came through the door, the whole room contracted around him. He took in the damage once. Then me. Then the ledger in my lap. "What is it?" I held the book tighter. My father's. Something unreadable passed over his face. "You said he died 8 years ago," he said. "He did. How? Officially? Heart attack?" I swallowed. "Unofficially?" After the papers accused him of skimming from a hotel account he managed. He never recovered from the disgrace, and then one night he just... My voice thinned. He just didn't wake up. Dante said nothing. That silence made me angrier than pity would have. "They lied about him," I said. "I know they did. He was many things, proud, difficult, impossible about butter temperatures, but not a thief. Show me." I should not have trusted him with something that belonged to my father. I did anyway. We sat at my scarred kitchen table while armed men moved through the wreckage of my life, and I turned pages with shaking fingers. Once I started explaining, it became easier. Ratios, substitutions, shipment codes hidden in ingredient adjustments. My father had been too clever by half. He embedded numbers in recipes so that anyone reading them casually would see pastry notes, not accounting trails. "This," I said, pointing to a page labeled Orange Blossom Torte. "The flour and sugar quantities mapped to warehouse numbers. The circled dates match delivery schedules. And here," I flipped farther, "these initials repeat next to cash discrepancies." Dante leaned closer. His shoulder almost touched mine. I forgot a word midway through saying it. Matteo, standing across the room, made a noise that might have been deliberate throat clearing and might have been the universe mocking me. Dante's finger landed beside one recurring initial. VM. My blood went cold. Vittorio? "He was your father's employer," Dante said. I looked up. "You knew that?" "Yes, and you didn't think to mention it?" His gaze held mine. "Not until I knew what else your father left behind." The betrayal hit in strange layers. First, the obvious one that Dante had known more about my family than I had. Then the worse one. That part of me had expected him to tell me. My chair scraped back. "You don't get to decide when I deserve my own history." "Sit down." "No." The word came out raw enough to scrape my throat. I stayed standing beside the broken kitchen table. My father's ledger clutched to my chest-lit paper could still be family if I held it hard enough. Dante did not raise his voice. "Adriana, you knew Vittorio employed my father. You knew there was something in this book worth tearing my home apart for, and you still let me find out in the middle of a wrecked apartment." His gaze held on mine, unblinking. "I knew your father's name intersected with Vittorio's. I did not know he left evidence. That is not the same thing." "It feels the same." Something in his face tightened. Not anger exactly, something closer to recognition. He moved around the table and stopped an arm's length away, close enough that I could smell rain still caught in his coat from outside, the cold, clean edge of him beneath the dust of my apartment. He looked down at the ledger once, then back at me. "When my sister died," he said, and the room went soundless around the sentence. "I learned that truth arrives in pieces, usually too late." I stared at him. He never offered things like that, not words that had weight before they even landed, not pieces of himself. "I'm not one of your operations," I said, quieter now. "I'm not a variable." "No," he said, You're the reason variables keep changing." The breath left me strangely. He reached for the ledger, and this time I let him take it. His fingers brushed mine. The signet ring at his hand knocked lightly against my wrist. Cool metal. That same terrible little current I now knew too well. He opened to the coded pages and went still. "There are 3 missing sheets," he said. I frowned. "What?" He tilted the ledger toward me. Tiny tears near the binding. Clean ones. Old, but not 8 years old. My stomach dropped. I never saw those pages. Someone did. Dante shut the book. His voice flattened into something colder than anger, and someone knew exactly where to look. Behind us, Matteo was already on the phone. I looked past Dante at the ruin of my apartment, at drawers split open, and flour drifting across the tile like pale ash. The violated, ugly intimacy of it suddenly felt worse. This had not begun tonight. Someone had been inside my father's life before they were inside mine. "Do you think Vittorio took them?" Dante's expression did not change. "I think," he said, "someone close enough to my house knew this ledger mattered before either of us did. That was worse, because Vittorio was an enemy. But betrayal lived indoors." He handed the ledger back to me, not gently, not harshly. "Carefully. Pack what can be salvaged," he said. "For what?" His eyes went to the busted front door, then to Matteo, then back to me. "For war." By the next afternoon, my old life fit into 2 bags and 1 black ledger. That was all I had been reduced to. 2 changes of clothes, my school knives wrapped in towels, my father's recipes, and the humiliating knowledge that I now slept under the roof of a man whose enemies had started using my name as leverage. The chapel stood on the near west side, tucked between a shuttered florist and a brick bakery that had been closed for years. St. Dismas, small, old, nearly anonymous except to the kind of people who needed God where no one else was watching. Dante brought me there after sunset with Matteo driving and 2 cars behind us. He told me only that one of the warehouse numbers in the ledger matched a property once registered to a charitable trust attached to the church. He did not tell me why his jaw looked carved from stone. I found out when we climbed the front steps. There was a plaque near the side garden, bronze gone green around the edges. The little candlelight from inside touched the engraved name, Serafina Salvatore. My chest tightened. I turned to him. "This is for your sister." "Yes." Nothing more. The chapel smelled like old wax, wet wool and incense sunk deep into 100 years of stone. Someone had left fresh lilies beneath the plaque. White, innocent, funereal. I hated them on sight. Matteo stayed by the door while Dante led me to a back pew and laid a photocopy of the coded ledger pages between us. Not the original. He was not reckless. I was beginning to understand that he had 2 speeds when it came to danger, prepared and too late. "What am I looking for?" I whispered. "Coordinates, front companies, anything that tells me where Vittorio has been moving cash off my books." "Your books?" His gaze shifted to me, dark in the candlelight. "He's been laundering through businesses once attached to my family. If your father found it, he may have buried the pattern in ratios." I bent over the page because it was easier than looking at grief in profile. Sugar, flour, orange blossom, almond extract, warehouse numbers disguised as weights. Delivery dates folded into oven temperatures. The code revealed itself the way pastry always did, slowly, then all at once. My father had built logic into beauty because he could not bear ugliness without structure. I traced a column with my finger. "These aren't just shipments. Look, the adjusted egg counts repeat every 4th line. That's not inventory, that's names." Dante leaned closer. I could feel his attention before I heard his breath. Warm, controlled, Darren not touching. "Initials," I said. "People taking percentages. VM is obvious, but this CAA shows up every time money disappears before the final transfer." "Carlo Abate," Matteo said from the door. The chapel went still. My head snapped up. "Carlo? The man at dinner?" Dante said nothing. I hated that silence now, because it always meant something inside him had already moved 3 steps ahead of me. He's your consigliere, I said. Was, Dante said. The single word had just left his mouth when the first shot cracked through the stained glass. It happened in fragments. Sound before understanding. Matteo shoving the chapel door shut with one arm while drawing with the other. Dante catching my shoulder and dragging me down behind the pew. Colored glass raining in hard, jeweled shards. Someone outside yelling in Italian. Someone else answering from the courtyard. I hit the floor on my knees. Dante went over me, one hand at the back of my neck, the other firing once, through the broken window with such controlled violence it made my stomach turn. He did not shout. He did not curse. He moved like the world had narrowed to angles and outcomes. Stay down, he said. There were footsteps in the side aisle. Then blood. Matteo stumbled back from the door, one hand clamped to his upper arm, crimson darkening his suit. He kicked the door shut again and braced a pew against it with his body weight. Two in front, he bit out. Maybe one in the garden. Dante rose into the storm of it before I could stop him. He crossed the aisle, fired twice, reloaded with terrifying calm, and shoved Matteo behind a pillar. I could hear men outside repositioning. The chapel bells began to ring. Someone had hit the rope in the scramble, and now the sound crashed above us in wild bronze bursts that made everything feel ancient and final. Matteo's blood ran over the floor toward my skirt. Training took over before fear did. I crawled to him. Don't, Dante snapped. He's losing blood. Adriana, I know what blood looks like. That shut him up for half a second. Long enough. I tore off my scarf, folded it hard, and pressed it to Matteo's arm. He hissed through his teeth but did not pull away. My fingers shook. His did not. Through and through? I asked. Think so. Good. Better than lodged. His laugh came out ragged. What kind of bedside manner is that? The honest kind. Another shot blasted stone from the doorframe. Dante fired back without looking panicked, which somehow made it worse. He looked over his shoulder once, saw my hands firm on Matteo's wound, and something inside his stare changed. Not surprise. Recognition. Sirens sounded in the distance, not police. Dante's men, fast enough to sound almost like luck. The gunfire outside shifted, then scattered, then stopped. For a second, the only noise was the bell still tolling above us and my own blood in my ears. Dante stood perfectly still, listening for the second wave. When it did not come, he lowered his weapon. Out the back, he said. Now. He hauled Matteo upright with one hand and caught my wrist with the other. His ring struck the inside of it cool and hard, and I was back in the ballroom for one sickening second. Except this time I knew what following him meant. The back steps of the chapel were slick with rain. His men had already sealed the alley. Blue lights flashed at the far end, false ambulance markings hiding guns under stretchers. Dante all but pushed Matteo into one of the vehicles. Then he turned back to me. You're bleeding. I looked down. A line of red cut across my forearm where stained glass had sliced me. It's nothing. His hand closed around my wrist. Not the injured one, the other. His thumb brushed once over my pulse, then over the faint tremor there. He took a clean handkerchief from his pocket and wrapped it around my arm himself, efficient and careful and infuriatingly gentle. You keep saying that, I whispered. His eyes lifted to mine. And you keep ignoring your own injuries. It's a scratch. That isn't why. The alley seemed to narrow. Rain ticked off the ambulance roof. Matteo, pale in the back seat, was pretending not to watch. Dante tied the knot and didn't let go right away. His voice when he spoke was lower than the rain. The first night on the dance floor, you were terrified. You knew I was dangerous. You still saw the blood before you saw me. I couldn't breathe. He wasn't speaking to me now so much as to himself, a confession dragged out of a man who would rather swallow knives. No one in my world does that, he said. They see the power first, or the threat. You told me to hold still. His thumb moved once against my wrist, over the place where his ring had first touched me. Then he let go. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Because when we reached the safe house and Matteo was taken upstairs to a doctor and the rain had soaked clean through my sleeves, Dante came to check the cut on my arm himself. In a kitchen too small for the silence between us, under one weak light, he cleaned the glass from my skin with steady hands and eyes. I could not read. "You should let Lucia do this," I said. "I should do many things." "That's not an answer." "No." The antiseptic stung. I flinched. His hand paused. "Sorry," he said. I stared at him. He almost never sounded human by accident. When he finished bandaging my arm, he should have stepped back. He didn't. Neither did I. His hand rose, slow enough to stop. It touched my cheek with the back of his knuckles, a question without words, and almost so sharp it hurt. I swallowed. My voice came out small and expensive. "If you stop now, I'll be relieved." His eyes darkened. "And if I don't?" he asked. My heart felt too fragile for my body. "Then I won't understand myself." That was the truth. The only one I had. Something in him gave way by a fraction. He kissed me as if he had been refusing it for weeks. Not rough, not hungry in the cruel sense. Just careful and deep and devastatingly restrained, one hand at the side of my neck, the other braced on the counter beside me like he was holding up the room. I kissed him back because not doing it would have been its own lie, and because fear had long since changed shape inside me. When he drew away, his forehead touched mine once. "War is here," he said. It was not a warning. It was a sentence. Matteo survived the night. That should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like a bill arriving early. The private clinic Dante used for bullet wounds and politically inconvenient surgeries occupied 2 floors above a funeral home in Cicero, which was exactly the sort of detail I wished I did not know about him. The waiting room smelled of bleach, espresso, and lilies. Somebody kept sending to the wrong kind of recovery. Lucia took over the corridor outside Matteo's room with a legal pad, a cigarette she never lit, and the expression of a woman choosing which city permits to destroy on principle. I sat in a hard chair with dried chapel blood on my shoes and felt my old life peeling off me in quiet strips. Gio arrived at 6 in the morning carrying 2 coffees and a paper bag of pastries from somewhere Maria had not approved. "She said hospital food is how governments confess they hate us," he announced, handing me a cup. "Also, if I return without feeding you, she'll use my ribs as kindling." Despite everything, I smiled. "You're very threatened by the women in this family." "I'm alive because I recognize power when I see it." He lowered himself into the chair beside me with an old man groan that was mostly performance. "How is he?" "Matteo?" "No, the bishop." He sighed when I looked at him. "Yes, Matteo." "Sleeping." "Good." "He gets mean when he's conscious and medicated. Last time he accused me of emotional weakness because I cried during a dog food commercial." "That seems fair." Gio clutched his chest. "You wound me, Adriana." The way he said my name, without fear or rank or agenda, almost undid me more than kindness would have. Down the corridor, Dante stepped out of Matteo's room. He had changed clothes at some point, but not slept. I knew that. Now the way exhaustion sharpened him instead of softening him, the stillness that became even quieter when he was angry enough to scare himself. He looked at the coffee in my hand, at Gio beside me, at the untouched pastry bag in my lap. Then his gaze fixed on the hallway television. A local reporter stood outside my mother's care facility. My blood froze. The Chiron ran silent under the muted screen. Attempted abduction foiled at St. Agnes residence. 1 guard. Injured. I was on my feet before I understood moving. What happened? No one answered fast enough. I looked from Dante to Lucia to Gio, and the truth arrived in pieces so sharp they barely fit. Men had gone after my mother while I sat here drinking coffee under armed protection. Men had tried to take a woman who needed help remembering her own birthday because she was mine. "You moved her," I said to Dante. His silence answered. "You moved her and didn't tell me? She was moved safely at 2 a.m. You don't get to decide when I see my own mother. She is alive because I decided quickly." The corridor flattened around us. I knew he was right. That was the worst of it. He was right, and I hated him for being right before I hated the men who forced the choice. I'm going there. No, she's my mother, and they know that. I stepped toward him anyway. Move. His hand caught my wrist. Not brutal, not even hard. Just absolute. The signet ring pressed cold against my skin, and something furious and frightened broke loose in me. Let go, I said. No. It was such a simple answer, such a familiar one. I had lived weeks now inside the architecture of his control, mistaking the sheltering parts for safety, but this was the cost, not the guns, not the blood. The fact that love and captivity could begin to use the same furniture. I pulled free. Gio went still. Lucia looked away. Dante's voice dropped low enough for only me. If you walk out of here without my men, you won't make it 3 blocks. Then send them. No. I stared at him. Why? Because the people hitting us now are not aiming at flesh. They're aiming at movement, panic, mistakes. His jaw tightened, and you are one bad decision away from becoming both. The cruelty of it was that he knew me well enough to be accurate, which meant I made the mistake anyway. I waited until Lucia took a call, and Gio went to bribe a nurse for contraband sugar packets, and Dante disappeared into Matteo's room. Then, I walked, fast, steady, purposeful, like I belonged to myself and no one would question it. I made it to the service elevator, down 2 floors, through the back garage, and halfway into a waiting cab before Matteo's replacement detail noticed. I almost made it. The first shot shattered the rear windshield. The second hit the side mirror. The driver screamed. I hit the floorboards. The cab lurched sideways into a concrete pillar with enough force to burst light across my skull. Then doors opened, voices shouted, and Matteo stupid, stitched up, half-drugged. Matteo appeared out of nowhere, because apparently loyalty in Dante's world was a terminal disease. He dragged open the cab door with one good arm. Out. I stumbled with him into the spill of gunfire and screeching tires just as Dante's convoy roared into the garage like judgment, with headlights. Men moved. Shots answered shots. I saw Matteo jerk and thought the world had ended, but it was his shoulder this time, blood darkening fresh through the clinic bandage. My mistake. Mine. Dante reached us 3 seconds later and looked at Matteo once, then at me. I had never seen that much feeling on his face. Not rage, betrayal. He put me behind him so hard my spine hit the cab, then he finished the fight with the kind of efficiency that never looked dramatic, only final. When it was over, 2 attackers were dead, 1 was gone, and the concrete smelled of gasoline and cordite and panic. Matteo was back on a gurney. And Dante would not look at me. An hour later, in a room that had once belonged to a funeral director and now held maps and guns and too many men pretending not to listen, he set a passport, cash, and a plane ticket on the table between us. What is that? I asked, though I knew. An exit? My throat tightened. You want me gone. I want you breathing. That's not the same thing. No. For the first time that day, he looked directly at me. It isn't. I stared at the ticket. Zurich. Midnight departure. New name, of course. New papers. New life. The kind people begged men like him for and rarely got. You don't forgive mistakes quickly, I said. His voice went quieter. Not this one. That hurt. Because it was true. I took the passport. Nobody stopped me. That was the real terror of it. Not being forced. Being allowed. 2 hours later, I sat in the back of a car headed toward the airport with my father's ledger in my lap and my old self, dying by polite degrees. Leave, and I could keep some piece of the girl who had once believed careful living counted as innocence. Stay, and I would never again get to pretend I did not understand what his world cost. At the expressway entrance, I looked down at the passport. New name. New country. A future so clean, it felt like erasure. Then I thought of my mother moved like an object through the night for my sake. Matteo bleeding because I chose panic. Lucia pretending cigarettes were not prayers. Gio making jokes in hallways that smelled like antiseptic so the rest of us would remember breathing, and Dante standing in a garage full of gun smoke, looking at me like I had reached into his chest and reopened something he had spent years stitching shut. "Turn around," I told the driver. He met my eyes in the mirror. "Miss, turn the car around." He did. At the first red light, I took my hotel ID from my bag. The old laminated badge that still said waitress beneath my picture. I bent it once, twice, then snapped it in half. When I walked back into Dante's war room under my own power, every man in it looked up. Dante did not move. I put the passport on the table between us. "I'm staying," I said. "Not because I'm trapped, because now I know what leaving costs too." The room went silent. He looked at the broken pieces of my old badge in my hand, then at me, and for the first time I understood that choosing darkness did not feel dramatic. It felt precise. Staying did not make me brave. It made me useful. That was how I survived the next 2 days, by reading my father's code at a long walnut table, while Dante's men moved pins across maps of the city and Lucia dictated names into 3 phones at once. The war tightened in rings. Businesses raided. Trucks burned. A judge recused himself suddenly and with visible fear. Carlo Abate continued to report for meetings with his perfect cuffs and his grandfather's smile. And because I had not yet learned to separate warmth from danger, I let myself feel relieved every time he entered the room. That was my second mistake. The first had already cost blood. The second cost a house. Dante left just before dusk to meet one of his union contacts at the River Warehouse District. Matteo went with him against medical advice and common sense. Lucia went to move financial records. Gio got sent to fetch Maria, who had declared that if the family planned on dying this week, they would at least not do it hungry. I stayed behind at Salvatore House with Carlo, 2 guards downstairs, and a page of my father's code spread open under the library lamp. Carlo brought me tea. I should have remembered that men who survive decades around power almost never do it by being soft. "You look tired," he said, setting the cup beside my papers. "So do you," he smiled. "Age forgives itself on men, not the ones who work for Dante." That drew a brief, genuine laugh. "No, our boy has never had much patience for frailty." Our boy. The phrase caught oddly, too intimate, too possessive. I looked down at the ledger page again. "Did you know my father well?" The question hung there a beat too long. Then Carlo sat across from me and folded his hands, well enough to know he was a talented fool. Ice moved through me. I looked up slowly. He did not seem surprised that I understood all at once. Maybe he had grown tired of pretending. Maybe betrayal had a natural appetite for revelation. "You told Vittorio about the ledger," I said. "I told Vittorio years ago that Bellini kept copies." Carlo's voice stayed almost kind. What he did with that information was always going to be ugly. My chair scraped back. The 2 guards outside the library never came. Carlo noticed my glance. "I sent them to the kitchen. Maria's fault, really. She makes everyone believe emergencies involve food." I went for the desk phone. He raised a small pistol from beneath the tablecloth. Not theatrical. Worse. Familiar. "Sit down, Adriana." I stared at him. "Why?" "Because Dante is becoming sentimental." Carlo's face altered by degrees, the softness leaching out until I saw the steel that had always been there, and sentimental men confuse protection with mercy. "You helped raise him?" "Yes." His eyes sharpened, which is why I know what indulgence costs. He told me pieces as he walked me out of the library and into the waiting car. Not everything. Villains never did. But enough. Enough to turn old suspicions into structure. My father had discovered Vittorio's laundering network years ago through hotel accounts and tried to hide evidence in his recipe books. Carlo learned of it because Carlo learned everything. Vittorio wanted Bellini ruined, not dead at first. A public thief was better than a martyr. Then Serafina, Salvatore 18, frightened, in love with the wrong man, and trying to flee a marriage arrangement, sought help through a bakery worker she trusted. My father, the safe house she was sent to, burned that same night. Dante had spent years believing an enemy family lit the match. He never knew your father was involved, Carlo said as the city blurred past the window. It would have made him less manageable. My hands went numb around the ledger. My father tried to help her? He tried to move her, Carlo corrected. And in our world, child, failed rescue is only another shape of death. Did Vittorio order the fire? Carlo looked out at the darkening street. Vittorio ordered what stability required. Something terrible and bitter rose in my throat. And you let him. I chose the family that could survive. We drove to an empty house in Oak Park. Of course it had once belonged to Dante's people. You could feel it in the layout, too many sightlines, too many reinforced doors hidden behind ordinary trim. The furniture was covered in sheets. Dust filmed the windows. The kitchen smelled faintly of old gas and dead roses. Carlo took my ledger and locked me in the breakfast room with rope at my wrists, though not cruelly tight. Even now, he behaved like civility could cleanse intent. Dante will come, he said before shutting the door. He always comes when blood and guilt share an address. When he left, the house fell into a silence so complete it felt staged. I sat in the dark and breathed through panic by inventory. Table. Rope. Cold radiator. One cracked tile near the baseboard. A sugar bowl on the sideboard, absurdly left behind under a sheet of dust. The rope around my wrists knotted in front, not behind. Carlo had underestimated women who worked with their hands. He should not have. I dragged the chair across the floor until one leg splintered against the tile. The noise sounded monstrous in the still house, but no one came. Piece by piece, breath by breath, I sawed the rope against the exposed wood until it burned my skin raw and finally loosened. My father taught me pastry because he said hands survived where pride did not. In the kitchen, I found a pilot light still alive in the old stove and a bottle of cooking alcohol. Carlo's men had likely brought without thinking. I soaked a dish towel, set it in a metal bowl and lit it. Not enough to burn the house, just enough to smoke thick and fast beneath the ventilation grate. A signal, a chance. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Carlo opened the kitchen door, saw the smoke, and for the first time lost his composure. You foolish girl. I stood with the lit bowl in both hands and the broken rope hanging from one wrist. You should know by now, I said, my voice shaking but still mine. I'm very bad at staying where men put me. His gaze flicked from the fire to my face. Something almost like regret crossed it, then a second set of footsteps hit the front hall. Heavy, fast, unmistakable. Dante. Carlo exhaled once and raised his weapon toward the doorway. Too late had finally arrived. Dante had never feared houses. Rooms, yes. Hallways, closed doors, the geometry of human betrayal. But houses were only structures until one held her. Then wood and brick became a pulse under his skin. He saw the smoke at the empty Oak Park property and knew two things at once. Carlo had chosen his grave, and Adriana had not waited quietly for rescue. Of course she hadn't. She never did the thing fear expected of her. The first shot hit the kitchen frame before Dante crossed it. He fired through plaster, moved left, and heard Carlo swear in the formal, disgusted tone of an old man offended by chaos. Matteo came in from the side entrance. Lucia's people took the back. The house erupted with the short, ugly violence of men who knew exactly where to place bullets. Then I saw him. Smoke blurred the doorway, but I knew the shape of his stillness before I knew anything else. Dante came through the haze with his gun up and murder sitting quietly on his face, and every rigid, terrified piece of me loosened at once in a way I hated and could not help. Down, he barked. I dropped just as Carlo fired. Glass burst above me. The lit bowl flew from my hands. Dante returned fire with terrible precision. One shot to Carlo's shoulder. Not killing, not yet. Matteo was on the old man a heartbeat later, wrenching the gun away, shoving him hard into the wall. Carlo did not beg. That somehow made everything sadder. Dante crossed the room and caught my face between both hands as if confirming structure. blood striped one side of my wrist where the rope had burned through skin. There was soot on my cheek. I could smell smoke, old gas, his coat, the metallic tang of adrenaline. Are you hurt? I'm here. Adriana. I looked at him then and saw the crack in his control. Small. Brutal. Real. I'm here, I said again, softer. His eyes shut for 1 second. 1. Then his forehead touched mine and was gone before the gesture could become comfort. Behind him, Carlo gave a wet laugh. There. That's the face I warned him about. Dante turned so slowly it made the room colder. Take him upstairs, he said to Matteo. No, I heard myself say. Every man in the kitchen looked at me. I swallowed smoke. No more hidden rooms, no more closed doors. If this ends with my father in it, I hear it. Dante's jaw tightened. You do not want this. Want has nothing to do with it. For a second I thought he would refuse. Then he stepped aside. Carlo sat in a chair at the dining table, one hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder, age suddenly visible all over him. Without the smoothness of control, he looked tired, almost ordinary. That made him worse. Lucia stood at the window with her arms crossed, face white with fury. Matteo leaned against the wall, pale but upright. I stayed on my feet because sitting near Carlo felt obscene. Tell her, Dante said. Carlo looked at me instead of him. Your father wasn't meant to die. My laugh came out broken. That is supposed to help? No. He glanced down at his ruined cuff, maybe at the blood. It is merely true. Vittorio wanted him destroyed publicly, a warning, a baker who skimmed from the books, a man no one respectable would trust. But Bellini kept copies. He tried to trade them for the girl. Serafina, I whispered. Carlo nodded once. He thought if he moved her first, then handed over evidence, he could save everyone. No one in the room moved. What happened? I asked. Carlo looked past me to Dante. Vittorio redirected the driver. The safe house burned. Bellini understood what he had caused. A pause. Men like that rarely survive shame when it wears a child's face. I felt sick, not because it excused anything, because it gave tragedy structure. And structure was harder to hate than randomness. Dante's voice could have cut wire, and you let me believe the Calabreses killed her. I let you become what survival required. No. Dante took one step toward the table. You let me become useful to Vittorio. Carlo met his gaze without blinking. Is there a meaningful difference? The silence that followed had teeth. That was the mirror. I saw it then, not in their suits or their power or their terrible certainty, in the shape of the bargain. Carlo and Vittoria had always believed blood paid for order. Dante had spent years saying he hated that logic while enforcing it with cleaner hands. This was what he feared becoming because some part of him already had. He looked at Carlo for a long time, then he looked at me. I did not know what my face showed. Grief, probably. Horror. Love in its least flattering form. The kind that saw too much and stayed. Take him, Dante said finally. Matteo straightened. Alive? Dante's eyes never left mine. For now. Carlo was moved downstairs to the car. He did not resist. Old men sometimes mistook inevitability for dignity. When the house emptied by degrees and the smoke cleared enough to breathe, I found Dante alone in the kitchen, staring at the scorch mark where I had dropped the bowl. His hand braced on the counter, head lowered. I stepped up beside him. He did not turn. Are you angry with me? I asked. Yes. The answer hurt because it was simple. Then he added, I'm angrier with myself. That doesn't help. No. He finally looked at me. You were taken from my house, by a man from your house. His mouth hardened. Exactly. That was as close to self-condemnation as he ever got. I reached for him before I thought better of it, my fingers catching the sleeve at his forearm. He went very still. So did I. That charged, impossible pause again. The place where almost lived and fed. Then he turned his hand and caught mine. His ring brushed my wrist, not a threat now. A tether. He lifted my rope-burned hand and looked at the raw skin with something murderous crossing his face. Not at me. For me. You should hate me a little, he said quietly. I do, I whispered, because lying had become impossible between us. Something like relief moved through his expression. Good. My laugh shook. That's not the reaction most men want. I'm not most men. No. He bent and kissed the inside of my wrist, right over the angry red mark the rope had left and right under the cool press of his signet ring. My knees almost gave out. When he straightened, his voice was back to iron. Vittorio moves tonight. Harbor Warehouse 31. How do you know? Because Carlo was too careful not to say it. A beat. And because men like Vittorio always think grief will make me slow. Outside, engines started. Guns loaded. The city prepared to swallow another night of blood and silence. Dante let go of my hand only long enough to holster his weapon. Then he said, "Stay with Lucia." I knew what he meant. Stay alive. Stay behind. Stay where I can afford to lose only blood, not you. I also knew one of us might not come back from the harbor. He saw that I knew. Neither of us lied about it. Warehouse 31 sat at the edge of the river like a bad memory refusing demolition. Brick, rusted doors, 2 dead floodlights, one working one that turned the loading dock into a stage. Dante's men moved through the dark in disciplined silence, but the harbor had its own noises. Water knocking against pylons, chains clinking in the wind, the far cry of gulls too stupid to respect violence. I stayed in the van with Lucia and 2 armed guards for exactly 6 minutes before it became unbearable. She told you to stay, Lucia said without looking at me. He told me to stay with you. And I am telling you to stay in the van. I looked at the ledger pages spread across my lap. One line kept repeating in my head. Not an address. A shipment note hidden in butter percentages and yeast delays. Cold storage. Secondary access. Lucia, I said slowly. There's another entrance. She turned then. I showed her the page, explained fast, the repeated temperature drop, the coded reference to freezer access on river-facing properties. My father had hidden service routes inside pastry timing because bakers understood temperature the way soldiers understood terrain. Lucia read once and swore under her breath. That bastard. Men were already inside the warehouse. Which meant Vittorio had a back exit. Which meant Dante was walking into a box. Lucia snatched up the radio. Rinaldi, secondary access on the riverside. Freeze tunnel. Move now. Static. Then Matteo's clipped answer. Too late to stay. Lucia looked at me once, hard enough to peel skin. If you get shot, I will kill you myself. That seems inefficient. Family trait, she snapped and shoved open the van door. We ran low along stacked pallets slick with river mist. The cold storage access sat half hidden behind a roll gate and 3 chained refrigeration units. One guard lay unconscious beside it. Another was dead. Lucia fired the padlock, kicked the door open and waved us through into a corridor so cold my teeth hit together. We heard the fight before we saw it. Shouts, gunfire, a crate splitting. Then Dante's voice once, sharp and furious, followed by Vittorio's almost amused answer drifting from the main floor. The corridor opened behind the warehouse offices. From there, I saw the whole brutal shape of it. Dante near the central aisle, jacket gone, gun in one hand, blood at his temple. Matteo on the catwalk above covering the east bay. Gio, God help him. Gio behind a forklift with a weapon he held like a man deeply betrayed by his own career choices. And Vittorio Marchetti at the loading dock under the floodlight. Silver hair untouched by the wind. One hand resting on a cane that concealed exactly nothing. 3 men held the line around him, and Dante, because the universe had a taste for irony, stood almost exactly where the ballroom dance floor had once centered me beneath the scope. Your problem, Vittorio was saying, voice carrying over the echo of the warehouse, has always been sentiment. First your sister, then the girl. Dante's answer was flat. You burned an 18-year-old child to protect a ledger. I protected a family. No. Dante took one step forward. You protected the version of power that required her to die. Vittoria smiled sadly, like a priest mourning a failed student. And yet here you are with guns in the dark, proving me right. The mirror. Again. Old men loved being correct more than they loved being good. One of the Tyrio's guards shifted toward the river exit. I saw the movement before Dante did. Without thinking, I grabbed a steel hook from the nearest equipment rack and hurled it across the floor. It slammed into a crate beside the man's boots with a bang sharp enough to turn heads. Matteo took the opening and fired. The guard dropped. Everything broke at once. Shots tore through the warehouse. Lucia shoved me behind the office wall and fired around the corner. Dio popped up long enough to shout, "I am dramatically underpaid for this," before ducking again as splinters rained over him. Dante moved toward Vittorio through the chaos with the terrifying calm I had come to know too well. Not reckless. I had once mistaken his violence for heat. It wasn't. It was arithmetic. Every bullet placed, every step chosen, every life weighed against an outcome he would carry home alone if he survived. Vittorio fired first. The shot grazed Dante's side. I heard myself scream his name. He didn't even look at me. He just kept coming. Then, Carlo stepped out from behind the loading crane. I had forgotten about him. Not because he did not matter, because grief had too many bodies already. He was unbound. Bleeding through a fresh dressing, gun in hand, my whole body locked. Vittorio smiled. There's the loyal one. But Carlo wasn't looking at him. He was looking at Dante. At the boy he had helped shape. At the man he had broken in the name of order. At the mirror he had finally been forced to see from the wrong side. "You should have left the girl out of it," Carlo said. Vittorio's expression changed by a hair. That was all Dante needed. The next seconds blurred. Vittorio turning. Dante firing. Carlo firing too, but not at Dante. At the man beside Vittorio. Then Vittorio's return, shot catching Carlo high in the chest. Matteo's bullet taking the last guard from the catwalk. Lucia, moving like a blade. Gio swearing inventively about tetanus and labor law. And then, it was just Dante and Vittorio in the floodlight. No speeches, no mercy. Vittorio lunged with the cane sword hidden in his hand. Dante caught the strike on his forearm, took the cut and drove him back against the loading dock rail. For one awful heartbeat, the old man smiled as if this, finally, was the proof he had wanted, Dante choosing blood over anything gentler. Then Dante stopped. Not the fight. Himself. He could have dragged it out. Could have made pain into lesson the way men like Vittorio always expected. Instead, he ended it with one shot to the heart. Clean. Final. Terrible. The warehouse fell silent except for the river and Gio, somewhere in the dark, muttering, "I'm definitely eating prosciutto tomorrow. If death wants me, it can take me seasoned." I ran before anyone could stop me. Dante turned as I reached him. Blood at his side. Blood on his sleeve. Breathing hard but upright. Alive. Alive. My hands went to the wound instinctively. "Hold still," I whispered. For the smallest second, in the middle of smoke and death and everything that had been ruined to get us here. His eyes changed. There it was again. That first night, that first impossible thing. I pressed my scarf to his side. He caught my wrist, not to stop me, to steady me. His signet rang cold against my skin through the mess of blood and fabric. Behind us, Carlo made a rough sound from where Matteo knelt beside him. Dante's face closed. He turned his head once toward the dying man who had made him and betrayed him in the same long breath of years. Whatever he lost in that look, he did not get back. Then he faced me again. "It is over," he said. This time it was. War ended less like thunder than paperwork. That was the first insult. The second was how quickly men began calling it stability. 3 weeks after the harbor, judges rediscovered courage. Contracts changed hands. Vittorio's allies vanished into countries with weak extradition and expensive weather. Newspapers wrote about financial irregularities in language so careful it almost qualified as fiction. Carlo Abate was buried without public scandal because Dante said the dead did not need editing, only judgment, and some of that belonged to God. If God still wanted the work, Matteo kept his arm and gained a scar he wore with active resentment. Lucia quit smoking for 4 days and treated the achievement like martyrdom. Maria expanded her kitchen into a private empire and informed everyone that if peace continued much longer, she might finally have time to despise them properly. And Gio, freed from imminent gunfire, turned his full energy toward dramatic complaints about cholesterol. "I'm telling you," he said one evening, leaning against my pastry station with all the elegance of a ruined saint, "if Maria loves me, she has a profoundly abusive way of expressing it." Maria did not look up from chopping pistachios. "If I loved you, Giuseppe Conti, I'd have let you die in the harbor. Instead, I made broth. That broth had onions in it." "Because you're weak." Gio turned to me, appalled. "Do you hear this? I survive an armed conflict and am rewarded with vegetables." I laughed and kept glazing the little citrus cakes cooling on their rack. "Maybe this is your real character arc." "My real character arc is marrying rich and hiring a chef who fears my cardiologist." Maria threw a dish towel at his head without missing. These were the sounds of the New World knives on boards, ovens opening, warm jokes in a house that still had armed men at the doors but no longer felt built, only for dying. My place in it arrived slowly, not bestowed, chosen in increments. A set of keys, a schedule that included my classes, an office for the foundation Dante reopened in Serafina's name, with scholarships for culinary students who could not afford proper knives. My mother in a safer residence under a name she did not remember, but liked because the garden had roses. And Dante. He did not apologize for what he was. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. Apologies from men like him were often just prettier lies. He changed things instead. Routes, protocols. The kinds of businesses his money would touch, the number of rooms in his houses that could lock from the outside. Some nights I woke and found the bed beside mine untouched, because he was downstairs in the office, relearning his empire with blood missing from it. Some nights he came to my room and stood in the doorway as if not crossing the threshold were a discipline. Almost still lived between us, but differently now, not from fear, from reverence, from the knowledge that some doors, once opened fully, did not close. The proposal happened on an ordinary Tuesday under the kitchen light. I had been up late tempering chocolate for a charity dinner and arguing with a batch of caramel that refused to reach the right amber. The house was mostly asleep. Rain ticked softly at the windows. Maria had gone home muttering about amateurs and humidity. I was alone in my white apron with sugar on my wrists when Dante came in through the side door carrying a stack of foundation invoices and looking, for once, almost tired enough to be my age and not all his ghosts. He stopped when he saw me. I stopped when I saw the blood on his thumb. Not much, just a clean split across the knuckle where paper or metal or some careless piece of the world had cut him open. I set down the whisk. He looked at the motion, and something quiet passed over his face. He knew before I reached him what I was about to do. "Hold still," I said. His mouth changed. Not a smile yet, the memory of one. I took his hand, ran cool water over the cut, wrapped it in gauze from the cabinet Maria kept hidden, and everyone knew about anyway. His signet ring knocked gently against the inside of my wrist as I worked. No fear in it now, only history. When I finished, he turned my hand over and kissed the sugar still dusting my skin. "Ballerina," he said, warm now, entirely. I think that was the moment I knew he had already decided something. "What?" I asked. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a small velvet box. Not black. Dark green, severe enough to be him. I stared at it. "This is a terrible kitchen to faint in," he said. "Maria would be insufferable about the tile." "You're joking. Only because if I don't, I'll say it badly." That shook me more than the box did. Dante Salvatore, nervous. The world really had changed. He set the invoices aside and looked at me in that direct, impossible way that always made me feel more visible than safe. I can give you exits, he said, money, security, homes in other countries. I can give your mother care for the rest of her life and never ask for anything you don't freely place in my hands. He paused. But I am done pretending I want distance more than I want you. My throat tightened. He opened the box. Inside sat a ring old enough to have belonged to someone who knew hardship before luxury. Diamond, yes, but not flashy. Elegant, human, worn smooth on one side by time. It was my mother's, he said. If you say no, nothing changes except that I'll suffer privately and Gio will become unbearable about it. That laugh that hurt and healed at the same time escaped me. He already is unbearable. True. I looked at the ring, then at him. At the man who had once dragged me onto a dance floor with blood on his cuff and death in the air. At the man who now stood under a kitchen lamp asking without forcing, offering without hiding the cost. This isn't a fairy tale, I whispered. No, you'll still be you. Yes, and I'll still know what that means. His eyes held mine. I would never ask you not to. That was it. Not the ring. Not the softness. The truth. I started crying before I could answer, which felt humiliating and also perfectly on brand for me. Dante looked stricken for exactly one heartbeat. I am failing at this, he said. I laughed through tears. No. Then I put my hand in his. Yes. The word left me shaking. He slid the ring on with such careful focus it felt almost sacred. Then he bent and pressed his forehead to mine. No speeches. No witnesses. Just the kitchen clock ticking and rain at the glass, and the absurd ordinariness of love arriving after violence and still demanding to be fed. From the doorway, Gio's voice floated in, delighted and scandalized. I knew it, Maria! Pay up! Maria shouted from somewhere down the hall. I said Christmas, you idiot! I started laughing again. Dante actually smiled. And because peace did not erase what we had survived, only gave it room to breathe beside us. We stood there under the kitchen light while the caramel threatened to burn and the rest of the house began to wake around our yes. Then the kettle sang. 9 months later, the kitchen smelled like orange peel, butter, and a life I had once thought belonged to other women. Sunday mornings at Salvatore House had become a small rebellion against the rest of the week. No meetings before noon. No business in the dining room. Maria still cooked as if feeding a battalion, though she now delegated enough of the pastry table to me that she could complain about my methods with proper artistic jealousy. Gio arrived every Sunday claiming he would be virtuous, and every Sunday stole at least 2 almond buns before the coffee was poured. Calories consumed standing up are emotional, not nutritional. He informed me solemnly as he reached for a third. That's not science, I said. It's culture. Maria smacked his wrist with a wooden spoon. Your culture is greed. From the breakfast room came Lucia's dry voice. Leave 1 bun for civilized people. Matteo, fully healed except for weather in his shoulder and a newfound habit of threatening interns with posture corrections, stood at the terrace doors drinking espresso and pretending not to smile at any of us. My mother sat by the window garden with a blanket over her knees and a plate of fruit she had no intention of eating because Gio kept sneaking her bites of pastry and calling it medicinal. The ordinariness of it still startled me sometimes, not because it was perfect. It wasn't. There were guards at the gates. 2 phones on Dante's desk that could still ring the world ugly. Some names never came up at dinner because grief did not become smaller just because it learned manners. But that was the miracle, maybe. Not safety. Choice. Warmth with full knowledge of its cost. I was glazing the last tray of blood orange pastries when the side door opened and Dante came in from the courtyard with cold air clinging to his coat. Every room still changed a little when he entered. That would never leave him. But now the silence that followed was softer. Familiar. Built around him instead of hiding from him. Matteo lifted his cup in greeting. Lucia asked whether the alderman had finally signed the permit. Gio stole a 4th bun while everyone was distracted. Dante answered them all in the spare, economical way he always had, then crossed the kitchen toward me. He stopped at my station. I looked up. And there it was, a fresh line of blood across his hand, bright against his skin where some crate or gate latch or careless corner of the day had opened him, my heart did the same thing it had done the first night. Not fear now. Recognition so deep it almost felt like fate showing its old handwriting. "You're bleeding," I said. His gaze stayed on my face. "So I am." Around us, the kitchen kept breathing. Pans, laughter, coffee. Maria threatening Gio with exile. Sunlight on copper pots. The ordinary life we had built with both hands and more blood than I liked to count. I set down the glaze brush, hold still. A quiet fell inside his expression, the kind that only I had learned to hear. I took his hand under the hot kitchen light and wrapped it in a folded linen towel from the stack beside the oven. Not because the cut was serious, because this was the language that began us, this small, stubborn act of seeing injury before power, flesh before fear. His signet ring brushed the inside of my wrist as I tied the knot, the same cool touch, the same gesture, nothing like it had been. He looked at the towel around his hand, then at me, and I watched the truth move through him in real time. What it cost him now. Not weakness, not control, love, maybe in its most humiliating and precise form, the kind that never again let him enter a room untouched by the knowledge that someone inside it saw the wound before the weapon. "Do you know," he said quietly, "that this is still the thing that ruins me?" My breath caught. I smiled a little because the kitchen suddenly felt too bright for crying. A paper cut? No. His thumb moved once over the pulse in my wrist, right where the ring rested cool against my skin. "You." There are moments when happiness does not feel like joy first. It feels like grief for every version of yourself that thought this was impossible. I leaned into him before I could become self-conscious about it. He bent, pressed his mouth to my forehead, and for one suspended second the whole dangerous, improbable world reduced itself to warmth and flower dust, and the man I had chosen with open eyes. "Ballerina," he murmured. Every chapter of us lived inside the word now. The ballroom, the fear, the rain, the rain, the rope, the harbor, the kitchen light, the hand I did not pull away, the life he had never learned to ask for until me. From the table, Gio groaned loudly. "Please, some of us are trying to maintain unhealthy boundaries with pastry." Maria tossed an orange peel at him. Matteo actually laughed. Lucia smiled into her coffee like she hoped no one would catch it. Dante straightened and looked around the kitchen we had filled with survivors. Then he reached past me, stole one of the still warm pastries from the tray, and took a bite before the glaze had fully set. I stared. That one was for the table. "It still is. You are impossible." "Yes." The answer made me laugh because some things should remain themselves. Outside, church bells from St. Dismas carried thin and clear through the open courtyard door. Somewhere beyond the walls, the city kept all its old shadows. Men like Dante did not become harmless because they fell in love. Women like me did not remain untouched because we chose tenderness anyway. The world was not cleaner for what we had survived, only truer. I looked down at his hand in mine, at the linen knot bright with the smallest bloom of red, at the signet ring touching my wrist like a promise transformed. The first time it had felt like a warning. Now it felt like home. And if there was one thread left unresolved, it was not whether I loved him. It was whether love could ever fully absolve the things done to protect it, or whether the point was to carry that question honestly for the rest of your life. Would you have chosen Dante and let blood answer blood if it meant saving the people you loved?